event today. So this is my name is Wendy Kok. I'm a partner at Hanawa Group. So Hanawa Group, it's a family office where we make investment into biotech or technology companies in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so I am also a committee member of Asia CEO community in the Women Leadership Group. And so this is really an awesome event because this is the first time we are kind of like doing a crossover between Silicon Valley and Asia CEO community. And we think this is going to be a really interesting topic, especially given the environment right now, whether it's business-wise or political-wise. And so with this backdrop in mind, so we've invited 4 distinguished guests. So first I'm going to introduce them one by one. And so first we have Andrea Wayne. Andrea, perhaps you can wave yourself.
Hi, everybody.
Yep, so Andrea is a general partner from Manhattan Venture Partners. She's based out of San Francisco Bay Area as well, but her company apparently has like offices in New York City, the Bay Area, and I believe also in Asia as well. So Andrea has a background that she previously worked in NASDAQ, and then she went into a startup, and then now she's in Manhattan Venture Partners helping, doing a lot of secondary transactions. And I know that apparently you have done like some of the largest secondary transactions in the United States, and we can definitely get into that in more details. And then next we have DeGheest. Anne is the, hi Anne. Anne is the founder and managing director of HealthTech Capital. She's also a founder of Medstars. So with that name, you can already understand that she has a background in health tech, biotech or medtech. And so she has been in the venture capital field for a long time, making investment in health tech related investments. So we'll definitely delve into her intelligence in this area, especially in the area of COVID. So if you guys Google on YouTube, you'll be able to find a lot of the amazing sessions that she have done and research on COVID-19, which is absolutely fabulous. I would highly encourage you to Google that in YouTube or YouTube search. And next we have Carman, and I think Carman is probably very well known in Hong Kong because she's a native in Hong Kong. She's a founder and also managing partner of Click Ventures. And I know Click Ventures has invested into many very good startups, including startups like Spotify, and you can remind me about that as well. So Carman has a lot of knowledge from the venture capital side, from an Asia perspective. But I know that Carman also makes investment internationally. So I know you've been busy like in Israel or like talking to people in Finland. So definitely love to dig into your knowledge about that. And finally, with Chenyang. So I sometimes struggle between calling you Dr. Xu or Chenyang. But I think you like the more intimate people addressing you as Chenyang. So Chenyang is kind of amazing because he's kind of like a technologist. He's a practitioner. At the same time, he's also an innovator because he has a background in Siemens, and then now he's kind of going into like a bit of educational kind of like a business. So he's the founder and or co-founder of like Silicon Valley Future Academy. He's also a partner at Brightway Future Capital, where he also makes investment into technology startup. So I hope they give you a pretty good background about every one of our panelists. So I'm very happy that they are all here. And with that in mind, I probably want to bring the audience to one of the if you can see my screen, if you wanted to, again, as I mentioned, change it to speaker view, you will be able to see my screen. So before we started the event, a lot of you has provided your responses about what is your favorite discussion topic. And it came back as one of the favorite topic. It's about how this venture, let me see, I'm trying to like enlarge my own screen as well. So the highest response is, what is VC's views about investing in the current environment? And I'm going to start with that question because since that's the most popular question. And with that in mind, I probably want to throw that question to Carman. And I'm going to switch that to like a backdrop where you can see some information about subscription business. And so Carman, here's my question, and I think a lot of audiences would want to know. So you're an angel investor in Spotify, and back then you have identified the innovative business model of Spotify, and this allows users to subscribe for a variety of music. And this subscription model has also been widely promoted by various technology specialists. You know, there are books like Subscribe, which is written by Zora's founder. And then there's a book like The Membership Economy, which is written by Silicon Valley tech consultant. And they all have identified the benefits of subscription model, especially in navigating the ups and downs in the business cycle. And what I have in my backdrop is a chart that has been prepared by Zora, and you can show that subscription businesses has navigated COVID much better. At the same time, they also have a faster growth than a lot of the product-based peers. And so my question to you, Carman, would be, what are your views on startups adopting this model given COVID-19? Is the subscription model something that should be explored in the long run?
Hi, everyone. So for this question, with the COVID as the background, I want to talk about at that time when Spotify just started to introduce subscription model. They are actually leveraging the streaming technology, which is just getting mature at that time. And that's why selling the subscription of access to a library of digital content is feasible compared to when the iTunes era, you need to buy the song one by one. But if you come to now, streaming technology is no longer a new technology. Even Netflix now can stream video instead of just sound like Spotify. So this is an old technology that there's a very mature company already, but still there's some business that you could consider a subscription model, like a SaaS model. A lot of SaaS software company, they use subscription model. But there's another model that I think is picking up tremendously in the current situation. I call it on-demand model, because you can see like a grocery on demand, and so the e-commerce is picking up, and also food delivery. So all these are around on-demand model that branch out from the Uber ride-hailing business model. So this on-demand model is currently getting more traction. Food delivery, on-demand logistics, and also recently on-demand doctor. So we call it a remote doctor or teledoctor. Imagine it used to be you need to queue up in the clinic, maybe 1 hour or 2 hours to visit the doctor, and sometimes maybe you just need to have a specialist letter. So now you could just go online, book a doctor. Within a few minutes, you get a letter. Okay, so this is another on-demand model on the doctor vertical that we see gaining a lot of traction. And apart from this, we think we also need to rethink the offline world, because the offline world has been disrupted a lot. So restaurant accommodation is facing a lot of uncertainty, and all these companies are hungry for new model that can help them to pick up the traction again. So startup that running some service that can enable the offline world to provide new service, or provide service with more experience that may have a very good future. For example, you know, we all track in our home. It delivery food for a long time already, right? So when we can go out again, we really want to have some new experience in the restaurant. So recently I see in Singapore, they have some restaurants start to utilize the VR technology to have some lighting effect, immersed with the food, and also have a story background. So you can see a little chef running around your plate and then show you the story behind the food that you are going to eat. So this kind of crossover immersive experience would be getting more and more popular. That's what I think. So actually the current COVID situation enable a lot of startups to really enter into the old world that the traditional business people have been so busy with their own model and they don't want to change, or it takes so long time for them to consider your service and solution. But now they are hungry for it. Yeah. So I think this is another chance that you could explore.
Yeah, I think absolutely. One of the things that you mentioned, it's about change. And I hear in a lot of your description, it's about how people are adapting using latest technology. I do kind of wanted to, with that background, wanted to point to and draw expertise from Chenyang, because I noticed that you have also share a lot of your experience about innovating through different business cycles. And you have recently also shared about your experience about how businesses can navigate COVID-19. And I also wanted to share this backdrop because I was doing some research and I realized 91% of investors believe it is important for healthy companies to prioritize building business capabilities, even at the expense of delivering earnings per share. So that appears to be for public companies, but I see a lot of similarities even for startups. So Chenyang, do you want to share a little bit about your experience on how people should build resilience through COVID-19? And then and the second question would be from an investor standpoint, what do you look for companies? What are the things that you look in your companies during this time?
Yeah, and this is a great question. So, you know, I have startups. So I actually co-founded startup both in the Valley and also in China. I think that right now, obviously, the COVID-19 has been going on for, you know, quite a long time, and it's like a global cardiac arrest, right? The whole economy shut down, and now we have to restart the economy. It's a whole strange new world for everybody. You know, I think there's a lot of tips out there. You know, back then, you know, you have to cut the costs. You know, you have to have a war room and mentality, and then you have to pivot your business model. I actually, you know, wrote an article for IEEE, also talk about if you can afford it, right? You know, and you should also care your customers. You know, like for example, the example in like Zoom actually has waived all the fee for education sector, and many other sector were hard hit, and that built customer loyalty. When customer is good, you can weather through that, right? If you can afford it. And also, I think one aspect is, you know, like the company I have in Guangzhou, and then when the COVID hit, you know, the business slowed down. But in this particular case, you know, they're in a fortunate situation where there's enough cash runway. So indeed, when the business slowed down, you use your time wisely to build the capabilities, right? Because as a startup, you grow very fast, and then, you know, a lot of internal process, people, you just don't have time to solve it. And you could use this time, you know, we actually cleaned up everything last 6 months. And now that, you know, things are coming back, and then the investor rush in, and we're perfectly ready for the next round of scaling, right? So I think that's really you know, there's a number of things you can do, just seize the opportunity. Never let the crisis waste it. Now, the second question as an investor, right? So I would say there are opportunity also for startups who couldn't make it, you know, and then they have to shut it down. You know, I have, just in last week alone, I have 2 entrepreneurs I mentored came said they have to shut it down for a variety of reasons, and they're early stage. But also, I think you know, that's also opportunity, because because whatever you started as a pre-COVID, you know, now post-COVID, there's a whole new world that you can optimize for. I mean, especially I would say 3 big trends, right, related around digitalization. Right, number one, already we have digitalization trend taking over the old economy, all the different vertical, like Carman said, but this is accelerating. And a lot of older industry now, they're upgrading digital capability. And then the second one is COVID. And suddenly people have no choice, right? And then they have to embrace it. You know, if you take UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, it's the top hospital here, and also Johns Hopkins University. I'm on the advisory board on both. And their health, you know, the telehealth visit jumped from like single digit to more than 95% in the first month, right? And then now the prediction is even after COVID, it will stay at around at least 30%, right? When everything go back to normal. And so basically this COVID caused a lot of upgrading and remote work, etc. And so digitalization trend will be accelerated. Almost we teleported what needed 5 years from now to today, right? The last one, I think particular for the Hong Kong, you know, Singapore, the Asian community, or China and Silicon Valley is the great decoupling of US and China, right? These are the two biggest countries in the world. And this great decoupling is actually causing separation in terms of internet, information, and actually the digitalization, there's a lot of upgrading and replication also in Asia. And I do think what happened in Asia on delivery, on supply chain and mobile payment, it will be actually accelerated into healthcare, into retail, and into many, many industries. There's a lot of creativity, innovation going on, and there's an even bigger demand for indigenous, like Asian-driven digital innovation, and to build up the infrastructure, whether from chip to software or AI, blockchain, you know, IoT, than just relying on the Silicon Valley technology. So I think that three, you know, I call it triple play. You know, it's a mega play. And if you're startup, you know, you are going forward, if you align with that and then have a business model is future proof, I think there will be investors really looking to that. So I just stop here. I have a lot of examples. Maybe later we'll share. Yeah.
Yeah, I possibly want to put a pin on the decoupling, because I'm definitely want to come back to that point, because that's one of the topics that the audiences would like to hear as well. So I definitely want to come back on that. But I also hear you talk about acceleration, because it sounds a lot of businesses are going through acceleration or change in business model. And on this, I kind of wanted to share with the audience, because this is a comparison of the speed of viral genetic sequence selection to first human study. So basically it's the speed of vaccine development. And what is really interesting is you can actually see how fast COVID-19 is when it comes to like human study. So it's kind of, not only is there acceleration on business model, it appears to be acceleration as well from the bio side. So with that backdrop, probably want to reach out to Anne and you know, seek your intelligence on that, because you have seen and invested in a lot of medtech, biotech companies, and you have also done a lot of research on COVID-19. Can you share with us about what is your view about investing into these companies? And then with the current COVID-19 backdrop, where do you see opportunities for whether it's businesses in the Silicon Valley or for Asia or for businesses in Asia?
Well, first, hello everybody. Good morning, I think, in Asia. And so several points I want to get across. First, when you look at this vaccine, you have to say historically only a third of the vaccine have succeeded. We have no data yet to show that we have a vaccine that lasts for 6 to 12 months, doesn't create side effects, and your antibodies are working. So I think we need a reality check. And in the FDA definition of what it takes to be approved, that means that you still have a chance of being infected 50 to 70% of the time. The vaccine is not the cure. Ironically, and is that developing new therapy may be much more important than the vaccine. So we'll talk more into that. I think the point I'd like to say about two people have brought up telehealth. The big thing that happened with telehealth is not the technology. In healthcare, we are regulated. And what happened with the regulation is that it took 10 years to go from 0 to 5% penetration of telehealth, because every state were putting barriers, not allowing, for example, in the US, a doctor from California to practice over the internet with somebody in Nevada, for example. There. Suddenly, when COVID-19 happened, all this regulation, all this barrier, all this petty fiefdom have been going on disappeared. That was the first thing. They could come back, but hopefully they won't. The second big point is that there was a difference in the payment system. And the thing I've learned is that the difference between a nice to have versus a must have solution is not determined by the technology, it's determined by the person who is paying. And in healthcare, if the insurance industry is not willing to pay, you may have the coolest technology, it's not going to take off. And so the thing that happened with telehealth is that they made one big thing, which is they agreed to pay at the same level for an in-person visit, which is face-to-face, versus a person that was over the internet. So this work, I think the key thing we have to, as entrepreneurs, is that technology don't sell. What you need to do is to spend more time on the pain point. And if you have a pain point, especially in healthcare, it's not a technology that fixes the pain point, it's a technology-enabled solution or services. And so you have two questions to ask yourself. Do you provide a full carve-out to say, I'm going to take a diabetic patient and all of that and provide everything? And we have had huge success in that place, which is called digital therapeutics. And these are Teladoc, who just went public, and Livongo that just had the $18 billion after 7 years acquisition there. And that's what I think is going to happen with COVID. Because with COVID, we're going to create a new category of chronic disease management. And if you haven't watched my video, please take a look, because long COVID or long hauler is the other expression, which are the survivors have long-term damage to their brain, their lungs, and their heart. And the data has been unclear if it's between 10 to 30%, but it's significant. You multiply this by 42 million people have been exposed, and we know we're underestimating that. There's going to be millions of people that we have to take care remotely by diagnosis and therapeutic in the home. So that new category is going to be humongous. And it's just starting to emerge where people are starting to put together a rehab center. So as far as my sector has a silver lining to COVID. It exploded. We raised $11 billion in Q3, and $449 million went for the Asian Pacific region there. So, still most of that is the US and Europe, but it is clearly taking off. And what people have realized is that we have to stop sick care, where we ask somebody to go into the hospitals in a very efficient way for the physicians to work. We have to bring healthcare knowledge to where people are, which is mobile in their home and offering that. And I think COVID has forced this to happen. And the survivor, if it continues to expand the way it is, which is very scary, is going to totally explode that category there. So as a result of that, at-home monitoring, remote diagnostics, taking medical device, making them smarter as an Internet of Things, and adding to that an intervention with some AI to know when you should intervene, all technology that exists, but gluing them together into new services is going to be across the world the new way we change healthcare. And I think, ironically, COVID blew up all the regulation, and that's one of the few nice things that came out of COVID. So our space has had an explosion of investment, which has created some issue there because the valuations are too high. We have a lot of tourist investors as well as tourist entrepreneur coming in, so you have to be a little bit careful what you're doing. Did I answer all your questions? You had a lot of questions there.
No, I think absolutely you're spot on, because this is what I am seeing as well, especially in the medtech sector because of COVID-19. The silver lining to the sector is that there's an increase in the fundraising, and a lot of my portfolio as well are adapting, and they are in fact thriving as a result of COVID-19. I'm not saying that that COVID-19 is a good thing, but then at the same time, people are adapting to that change. And you did mention a focus on pain point, which I think it's so relevant for a lot of the startups or businesses that are trying to address customer needs. And I kind of, on this point, wanted to draw expertise from Andrea, because Andrea, and I'm looking at your bio, is that you have facilitated more than 10 billion secondary investment in late stage private companies. And so you have probably seen a lot of them, and the fact that they're late stage meant that they have been successful. They addressed the pain point, and then that's how they make it to the next level. And so I guess my question to you is, you're a late stage venture investor. Where do you see are the successes of these companies? And when you're facilitating those transactions, what do you normally ask for from these businesses?
Sure, thank you, and it's so nice to be here with everyone. So, yes, so my firm is Manhattan Venture Partners. We're a bit of an interesting model, and I think this adds a little context. We're a venture fund with 4 funds that we've raised under management, about $1 billion total. over time, and we've invested in companies like Spotify, actually, before the RPO, DraftKings, one of the online gambling companies, Lyft, Pinterest, and many others that are very well known. What's really interesting in the late stage right now is that there's such a focus on the balance sheet of a business, leading into a direct offering of sorts, whether it's a direct traditional IPO, whether it's a direct listing, a SPAC, or a considerable M&A event. Historically, companies were betting on growth in the years, 1 to 2 years before their traditional listing. But I would say that investors are now taking a look at the balance sheet and really honing in on where their spend is going in the late stage. So with the Manhattan Venture Partners model being a mix of a venture fund as well as a brokerage firm, coupled all in one kind of offering that we provide, our venture fund invests, and then our brokerage firm is allowed to trade these private company secondaries. But it's not just about a big name company anymore and whether or not it should be actively traded pre-IPO. It's, does that company have the balance sheet? Does it have the runway? Is it going to actually turn profitable in the 1 to 2 years after the public listing? Or is it a company that's going to need to continue raising money on an ongoing basis, even post IPO? And would that be able to sustain the business? So the conversation has really shifted from, are you a growth company, to are you a profitable company going into the listing? And that, like I said, the balance sheet is ever more important. The free cash flow statement's important. Is there any debt that's been issued that's going to convert at the public listing? All of these are major factors. And I will tell you, the US, I think, is really at this point kind of struggling a bit, because they are seeing that the major IPO listings that are happening overseas, look at Ant Financial, those are going with Asia-based exchanges. And that is a change for the United States. Usually you would see these listings be a dual listing between Hong Kong and the New York Stock Exchange, or Hong Kong and NASDAQ. The fact that Ant Financial did not even look at the US exchanges is very telling. And I think it's a reality for US investors that they're going, if they want to kind of capture the value of late stage private companies internationally, they may not see them trade on the US exchanges because it's just not the right venue for late stage companies anymore. So some of these variables are all that go into the world that I operate in, which is, do I make a bet into this late stage company? Maybe we don't just look exclusively in the US, but if I look to Asia, if I look to Southeast Asia, do I look to Europe? Where is the company going to list? Where is the trading volume going to be? And then those investors in those regions of the trading exchange, I have to see how they will value that company and what do they find valuable in that public listing. Is it a growth story or is it a profitability story? So that's what I find really interesting. And I would say that shift to the focus of profitability is something I've personally been hoping for as an investor. But now it seems like you can't just ride on growth. You have to look to give me that free cash flow margin being a positive thing going forward. And it's ever more important.
Thanks, Andrea. You talk about focusing on profitable. I think this is all investor an area that they like to see. But for a lot of the startups that are in technology or in biotech, they tend to focus on growth, and somehow that's just the nature of their business model. And I think on this one, I wanted to throw out to the panel, all the panel speakers, it's what are your experience? Because I would kind of wanted to hear a different perspective, because for example, Spotify, I guess people, when they're investing at the early stage, will be looking for growth. So maybe this question is to Carman. It's because Carman, you have invested into so many companies at the early stage. Do you combine both growth and profit, or do you kind of like have a different focus at different stages of the companies? Oh, are you unable to unmute yourself?
Yes, somehow we accidentally all got muted. I just got myself unmuted. Gary, you may have to help her.
Well, while Carmen is trying to fix her system problem, I will definitely come back to you. But maybe the question would then be to Chenyang, because you have helped a lot of companies try to innovate. And so in a way, it's like, it's kind of a combination of growth, but then at the same time, kind of sacrificing on the profit as well. So how do you navigate that balance?
Right. I think that, I have worked with a number of startups, some of my own. I do think depends on the space. For example, the startup PVmed, I'm a co-founder and managing partner on the board there. That company is in Guangzhou. It's on using artificial intelligence to do cancer imaging diagnostic, particular treatment. That is a space that's exploding in the last few years in China. There was just hundreds of companies who apply AI into the medical imaging space. And so I think in that space, growth is more preferred because you want to do land grab. And as long as you have long enough runway, we do already see that the gold rush, a number of early start, they have raised a lot of money, but they burned too quickly. And so they were not very fiscal careful, and then did not leave enough runway, ended up the game over. But in my company, we're balancing more on the runway but on the growth. But the key thing is really just go one milestone after another. And as long as you have enough runway, the investor backing you up, I think growth is still the first priority. I would say in the early stage, but as transition to later stage, because also I work with larger companies as well, then certainly with the current atmosphere, I think profitability became important. That's why I think it's a balance. Yeah. One more thing is I also work with startup in mid-America, and then link actually in Nebraska, remote monitoring, etc. In that cases, there's not a vibrant VC community nearby, and then the entrepreneur is a serial entrepreneur, have sold previous company for double-digit millions. So in that cases, actually focus on cash flow, break even, bootstrap without necessarily go raise VC money could be a winning strategy. So I think it really depends, where you are, what stage you are, and what objective and your competition are. Yeah.
Thank you.
If I can jump in, Wendy, I've seen a lot of cycles, with the .com, the PCs, and everything else. And every time we hit a crash, for whatever reasons, they're the first thing all the VC do is all their portfolio. And we ask them, slow down the growth in the burn as far as hiring people ahead of getting revenues, and get yourself to a longer runway. Now, longer runway is getting more capital, which may not always be available, or basically slowing down the growth. So I think it's in that context that everybody has to make their own decision there. And pretty much in March and April, all the VCs stopped. They did all their portfolio company, they ranked them, and then decide who they were supporting and who they were not. And I think it's the same situation happened this time.
Thank you. And I see Carmen has already unmuted herself. Carmen, your perspective?
I would like to supplement how to make a decision whether you use the growth strategy or profit strategy. So for growth strategy, it's actually more suitable for the kind of business model that has the network effect. To give you an example, if you look at Facebook, so Facebook is very suitable for using growth strategy because first of all, the unit economics for Facebook to grow is pretty reasonable because they have the viral effect. So they don't need to, and it's an organic viral, so they don't need to burn a lot of marketing money. The second is the network effect. So when you have more friends within Facebook, then the probability for you to join and for you to enjoy reading those news feed will be bigger. So the network effect for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or even TikTok, this kind of business model is very important. That's why they are very suitable for using the growth strategy. They become as big as possible and as fast as possible before other potential competitors come in. And when they accumulate critical mass, the network effect, basically most of the user would like to continue to stay in the ecosystem instead of jumping to a new service provider. And that's why this is actually a pretty suitable example to explain the growth strategy and profit strategy.
Got it. And interesting because Carman and Chenyang, you're all investor, and including myself as well. And I have to agree with all of you. And then kind of like Andrea, I know you're also an investor yourself, and you work with a lot of limited partners. And what's your reaction to the comments from our panel speakers? Does limited partner think the same, or do they kind of have a different kind of like focus?
Yeah, so I will say there's not a single investor I know who likes net operating losses. So that's important to factor into how I look at this. Overall, I would say that I work with the limited partners that Manhattan Venture Partners has. They're on a global scale. They're highly concentrated in Southeast Asia, as well as Mexico and greater Latin America, as well as the UK. So those are probably the geographies that I spend the most of my time in and interacting with investors, which I'm very lucky to be doing. A lot of the investors that I speak with are very conservative, as Carmen said, around where is that spend going and what percentage of your revenue is being utilized in sales and marketing versus R&D versus G&A. And so overall, if investors are seeing that you're spending a lot on sales and marketing, the question is, are you creating that flywheel effect to generate the growth so that your gross margin profile is very high and you can turn on profitability when you need to based on the forecast you provided? I would say it's all about the narrative you're telling your investors. In the late stage, they do want to know that you're being self-sufficient. They do want to know that you could get to profitability if you do choose to do so. And I would say what's really interesting is that my investors that are international, the LPs that are international, many of them actually focus a lot more on that free cash flow margin, the operating losses, that percentage of revenue and the spend, even more so than my American LPs. My American LPs are actually, I feel like, almost too generous as it relates to growth. But it really, as one of these panelists is saying, it's very much so about what business we're talking about. My firm invests very much so in the enterprise SaaS and consumer marketplaces and alternative finance and infrastructure finance. So we're in businesses like the challenger banks that are very popular these days, which have a very specific business model. We're in the companies that are enterprise software. We love enterprise software. We were investors in companies like Asana and Palantir, which had a mixed revenue model. And we saw that, enterprise software and SaaS metrics, it's a very specific profile of a business. I'm looking for a certain annual recurring revenue. But if I'm looking at marketplaces, again, a different revenue profile. But as long as the core thesis of what I'm saying is, as long as the narrative ties together and the company doesn't change their story too much around that path to profitability leading into an exit event in the last 1 to 2 years, I think overall it lends itself to being a business that will likely be able to raise quite a bit of money going into whatever listing they're hoping to do.
Got it. I think this is absolutely helpful, because if I try to summarize what every one of you have explained to the audience, is that there are a few main points. It sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you have spoken about focusing on pain point, which I believe is absolutely very important for startups in every kind of like sectors. And then focusing about the free cash flow, which is also important, especially in this complex environment. And then next is definitely, hey, how do you grow using your technology? So on this point, I know, Chenyang, you were explaining that you have a lot of examples that you can demonstrate, but at the same time, it's how do people be innovative in this kind of environment, especially when, given the trade war, it seems like instead of like global exchanges, now countries are going into like more silo and a more country based. And you are the co-founder of Silicon Valley Future Academy, where you're actually trying to promote cross-border knowledge sharing. So where do you see, and how do these businesses fit themselves into this environment and trying to be innovative as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's traditional, practicing innovation, technology, products, markets, etc. But I do think COVID bring a whole new dimension of innovation for startups, right? If you look at the people and place, traditionally we basically say proximity is productivity, right? So you work with people nearby and then you build a team. But now, it doesn't matter where you are, and you all go through the Zoom, or other video conference. So you can actually tap into talents in whether regional ecosystem, even global ecosystem. I've seen a rise of companies of different stages, even late stages, tapping expertise, basically from Europe to Silicon Valley, from Asia to New York, or even Africa to Europe and Silicon Valley. So it's actually a lot of dynamics there. I do think entrepreneur can open up mind. I mean, I know it does take some conviction and time to build up the trust digitally compared to the old way. But I think if you can manage that, and this is really liberating, because suddenly the people dimension, which is the most important P in building a business, you are basically enlarging your options, and also you can optimize for cost and growth. The other one is the place, right? I've seen startups, actually a number of them, shut down their company in the offices because it's just a cost, and then they use the digital collaboration tools, and they found actually it's more productive, particularly for early stage, even for late stage. I think that also could be quite some innovation on how do you retool your process, your culture of the company to be basically digital, not digital compatible, but digital ready and digital winning, right? The last one, also just to tell you an interesting story, and there was one startup I mentored. They were on the TechCrunch, I think the top 50 will change the word. It's basically using technology to help doing transportation. And that company, I cannot disclose the name, but basically when the transportation of passengers stopped, and then their entire business model that raised double digits millions, it's basically no longer working. And then this forced the founder and the founders to think creatively, and they looked deep into their entire technology and business and product stack. And they realized the core technology can be pivoted very quickly to a whole new segment, which is actually trucking industry for truck drivers to make their transportation, more comfortable and more productive for the fleet owner, and have a great ROI. So we think literally a matter of weeks, they were able to come up with a whole new product based on the technology for a whole new segment. Actually turns out to be even bigger, right? So if without that creative innovation thinking, and then just waiting for this whole thing over or continue the old mindset, they would not be able to pivot very quickly. So I do think the COVID actually drives some new ways of innovating that I haven't seen before. So.
Got it. One of the things that Andrea also mentioned, it's about you mentioned about Ant Financial, not looking into the US and listing in Hong Kong. And I feel that this is not, this is kind of like a result of the trade war. And I wanted to go back to, everyone can see my backdrop. It's the second highest favorite discussion topic. It's about VC view about the US-China trade war. And it sounds like we are going into the political area, the political side. And I want to touch on a little bit of that, because every one of you kind of have some experience on that, on that trade war. And before I get into the questions, it's this is a backdrop that I wanted to share with everyone. This is a research that I have done. And on the top chart, it actually shows the US trade deficit, which is the cause of the trade war. And the area in red is the trade deficit with China. As you can see, it is growing, and that's just actually the reason why now the US and China is arguing a lot about everything about trade. But at the same time, I think a lot of people fail to see that despite the trade deficit growing, US in the past years have, in terms of GDP or real or nominal, has been growing as well. And if you look at the unemployment rate, beside the financial crisis, the employment has been dropping. Well, I haven't taken into account COVID-19, but this is just a period between 19 and 2018. So I guess for the audience, this is the backdrop for trade war. Then my question would then be for the speakers are, because of the trade war, a lot of the businesses either in the Valley or in Asia are also kind of like suffering, because should they expand into the US or should they expand into China or both? Because if you look at the market itself, Hong Kong is very small as a market. So for a lot of the startups, they try to look beyond Hong Kong. And so I wanted to perhaps kind of like ask this question. It's obviously because of the trade war, you've seen a lot of like changes as well in terms of people investing into the biotech area. And so for these companies in biotech, they used to be able to list in the US, or they could also go to Hong Kong to list. Do you see that there's a change in attitude because of the trade war?
I may not be an expert on the biotech listing, but one other thing I want to bring up is historically, we try to be efficient. And the reason why China was so successful as well as India is that we went into a just-in-time global supply chain. And we have a situation right now where it blew up in everybody's face. And it blew up especially bad during COVID, because what happened is two things. There was an idea that the raw materials were coming from India or from China that were being sent, for example, for drugs to India to be manufactured, and India, for example, provide 25% of the generics to Europe. There's a shortage right now of 19 out of the 40 drugs that you need in a hospital setting to basically treat people with COVID. In addition to that, there was this whole fiasco with the PPEs, the provide protection there, where not only there was a shortage, and both China and India shut down all the exports, and suddenly the Americans who were relying on that just-in-time supply chain absolutely collapsed. But then there was a lot of problems there when the FDA starts opening up and making it easier for Chinese vendors to qualify to send this supplies, as well as the diagnostic test, that unfortunately a lot of very bad quality products came out on the market. And it was so bad that, it really has, I think, damaged the reputation of China, not only in the breakdown of the supply chain and keeping everything for themselves during the crisis there, but the fact that the quality of what came out has really hurt people. So I think there's several issues to deal with. I think it's much more than a trade war right now. It started with a trade war, but I think now there's where is the role of China in the supply chain globally? How do we make sure this doesn't happen again the way it basically blew up on all the hospitals? California, for example, passed a law saying that every hospital needs to have their own supplies and inventory independent on any reliance from China or any outside vendors. And then on the drug side, we cannot build a new plant in biotech overnight. Even if company there's one company got $400 million from the government, it takes a while to build a plant, get it certified. So the big thing we have is that the role of China in the supply chain is being challenged. The quality has really been really damaging, I think, the reputation. I think that's what we need to talk about. In that context, there is a trade war, but I think it's a much bigger issue than what it was 6 months ago.
Got it. Thank you. Carmen, I see you've unmuted yourself. Do you have anything to add to that point?
Yeah, so I think as a startup, you could consider there are 3 scenarios. So one scenario is you are a startup in China. So now instead of expanding to US after you occupy the whole market in China, maybe you will start to consider expanding to other countries instead of US. So that's one of the reasons why those companies pick Southeast Asia as their next market at the moment, or Europe for some startup. And on the other side, if you are a US company, then it's a similar situation. You don't expand to China anymore nowadays. And if you are a company that not in this region, actually you have an advantage that you can still expand to anywhere. But you need to consider a very tricky effect, which is some new regulation in US, such as CVS. For US company, if you raise money from foreign investor, you need to go through the process being checked by CVS. Even your investor is just a minority investor. And for other companies who are not US company, but you have US client, in fact, you also need to be careful, because we have seen cases that some, Israel company or even company in other country who has US clients, big US clients. So when they go through the compliance checking and consider whether they renew the contract, they look at the cap table of the company and they look at the structure of the company. And so it becomes that, you know, even though you don't raise money in US, you just have US client, but you still indirectly go through the same serious process. So these are something that you need to take note.
Thank you. And I know that we're kind of like running close to the end of the seminar. There are a lot of questions that came in, and these questions are all related to what we have discussed just now. And I kind of wanted to put some of these questions out to the panelists. And this is a really interesting one. It asks, what's more important, a brilliant idea or a flawless execution plan? So I see Anne immediately has her hands up. And
that is a no-brainer. In my mind, the idea is 1% of the effort and the execution is 99%. And honestly, if you have a very good team that can execute, they can fix a bad idea. Where if you have a bad team that has a brilliant idea, they'll probably screw it up. Sorry.
I have to agree to that as well. I think because for a lot of these startup ideas, you would find a lot of competition already out there. So you're usually not the only one within the industry doing the same thing. Ultimately, it's about how well you execute that idea and then grow your customers. Does anyone want to add to that point?
I mean, you know, my seeing is, you know, depends on the stages too, right? You know, I do think you need both, but I think the most important is neither of them. It's the people. I think if you, as Anne said, if you hire the very best people and then really help you to drive it, you can fix the bad idea, and these great people will do the great execution. But I do think early stage, a brilliant idea married with great people could be very convincing for raising capital. But then once you get to product market fit, as you go scaling, then it's all about execution with great people. So I would put people ahead of anything. So
yeah,
thank you. Go ahead.
I would like to supplement. So actually there is a pretty good process that early stage startup can go through to test their idea and also test their own strategy. So just now, Chenyang mentioned about the product market fit. There is a mechanism for you to measure the product market fit so that you would understand whether your current model reached the product market fit yet. We call it a PNF. So you could do the calculation through survey in a certain way with your customer, just like what we did today. Before the panel, we did some survey, collect some questions. So you just search how to measure product market fit online, and then you can see a lot of methodology. It's pretty standardized. And then you go through the iteration process, fine-tune your model.
I think you might be breaking up a little bit. Yeah, you're okay now.
Okay. Yeah. So if you go through the iteration model, after you get the product market fit, and then you iterate to fine tune your model. If you didn't get the product market fit, you need to pivot to a different model. So these processes are very standardized. And you know, sometimes when you have a very good idea, after going through this process, you would understand whether your idea is really a good idea and whether it adjusts the pain point of the market.
Yeah.
The interesting point is that if you take a new product into an existing market, it's very different than to take existing technology and adapting them to create new markets. You know, for that cases, you can build a very big company, but it's very hard to validate at the beginning because you're creating the market. So I think you need to have different tools to validate, you know, if you have the story. In that time, it's just be out there and learn, adjust, and correct. Resilience and flexibility is the key to success.
Absolutely. The next question I have, it's also interesting. Perhaps we have already answered that, but I'm just going to ask it and say, what are some common mistakes people make when pitching to you guys and that you guys wish they would stop making?
I think in me, and I will let the rest of the group talk, is that they sell me a technology and how cool the technology is. And I basically tell them, stop, tell me what the problem is, tell me what the pain point is, and tell me how big it is. And then tell me how you fix it. Then you can tell me how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This,
I would say,
is that Andrea?
yes. Yeah.
Go ahead, Andrea.
I would just say something kind of obvious is make sure you understand, your audience. Even though I know I'm a late stage investor, I would say really researching the partner you're speaking to or the angel investor you're speaking to, and ensuring that, that they have the background or the interest to really align with your values and your business from the get-go. Because, I think that too many entrepreneurs go to investors and assume that we all do the same thing, we all invest in the same sector or vertical. And I would say aligning with the right investors could be one of the best things you do for your business, and it's a long-term relationship that's not going to go anywhere. And ensuring that you're speaking to the right investors based on their background, their interests, that they're, as much as investors are a checkbook, they are cash to bring in to the balance sheet, they are your partner and they do want to help. And so with that in mind, targeting the right investor. Are they the right early stage investor? Are they operating the space that you are building a business in? These are just some really, I think, obvious statements that entrepreneurs should keep in mind when targeting investors.
Yeah, maybe just to add to what Andrea also answered, I've seen startup founders were so focused on pitching whether technology or even the business model and this PPT, but they forgot the biggest pitches themselves, right? And then they need to really show, because the investors investing in the founder and investing, have the trust. Once they put the money, they will be with them for a long time. And then I've seen also a lot of entrepreneurs misunderstood that. And then their interaction with the investor, because it's a journey, it takes a long time to close. It was pretty subpar. Ended up, even though they have a very good technology, very good business model, even good market traction, but investor lose the confidence in the entrepreneur themselves. Often is the biggest killer. So yeah. Again, back to the people. Yeah.
Absolutely. And there is another question that asks, how is the pandemic affecting fundraising and the trends that you guys see in the future going forward? So Andrea, because you do a lot of fundraising and secondary transactions, do you have any insights on that in terms of fundraising?
Yeah, so I wish valuations would actually have come down a little bit lower. Let's have that note. I'm just joking, but at the same time, I would say, it seems like companies have really looked to investors for support, even ahead of the ask for the fundraising process. So I actually, in the late stage, and we are in the Series D, E, F, maybe the Series C. So it is later stage. It seems like, the question is very much so is, can you be a value add investor for me as a CEO today, as I'm navigating some of the challenges around, as some of the panelists said, how do I message to my employees that we're going to be digital for the foreseeable future? How do I provide my employees with benefits to show that I value them ahead of going back to the office? And these are entrepreneurs asking the investor community in advance of fundraising to be value add, because we're right now in this very battleground area where entrepreneurs are facing something they've never done before. And so much of it is about that retention and the ability to recruit talent. And now it's on a global scale. So really leaning on investors, even prospective investors, ahead of asking them to invest in your round is something I'm seeing a lot more. And it's showing that you could be value add in a time of crisis, more or less. And it's an evolving time. And I think the best entrepreneurs that I work with are ones that are taking advantage of the situation in the best possible way by saying, we value our employee base. We value our prospective employee base. So how do we align in with investors who can help us get there and put value in our employees before they give us a check for our next round of funding?
Got it. I see Anne already has her hands up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'm observing the trend is the removal of the limitation due to geography. And what I mean by that is that it used to be, if you were in Silicon Valley, you know, a lot of the VCs, they would only want to invest west of the Rockies, as we call it, because they didn't want to fly to a board meeting and spend 3 days, you know, for 2-hour meetings. Suddenly we've realized that we can be very efficient, you know, using Zoom and other tools, and maybe you don't go to every board meeting in person, and therefore it's not that much of a burden. So suddenly people are willing to invest beyond the normal limitation geography. It has also helped if somebody's starting a company in an area that's very competitive to get the talent, suddenly those issues are starting to take away. So for example, in San Francisco, you know, a lot of the big cities now are dropping in their rent because people are moving outside the cities, in fact, outside the state. So suddenly recruiting the talents doesn't have the same limitation if you're all fighting for the same software engineers, because these people are maybe easier to get remotely there. So it has changed some of the dynamics and some of the selection where people are being excluded, and now it's much more inclusive.
Absolutely. So I want to be respectful of the time, because this event was set for 1 hour, and we're over 1 hour by 3 minutes. I guess really to wrap up the session, it's and I have to apologize to some of the audiences. We are not able to answer every question that you have. So I guess just to wrap it up, perhaps from every one of you, the panelists, is your viewpoint for the audience in terms of the investment environment on a going forward basis, given the political situation or COVID-19. Perhaps starts with, I would say maybe like Carman.
To wrap up, I want to share that actually in this situation, the entrepreneur who can turn risk into opportunity will stand out. So no matter what happens, think carefully, look for the opportunity. There's opportunity everywhere.
Thanks, Carman. Chenyang?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of echo what Carman said. Basically, never let a crisis go wasted. Many of the greatest companies actually were started from the last, you know, crisis. And so I think this is opportunity to really redraw what the future is for the companies. One more point to add, I think looking also corporate venture is a very interesting source. It's challenging, but it can be also an effective partner and funding for driving your company forward and globally. So.
Absolutely. Anne?
Yes, I mean, historically, the biggest company have been started during a recession because there's less competition, and the capital is still there because it has been raised and has to be deployed. I think it's very important that people think like in hockey. You don't go where the talk is. You know, you basically go where it's going to go. And I think right now we're living amazing changing history. The old days are never going to be the same. The way we work are going to be very different. The way we build companies is going to be different. And if you're flexible in your mindset and can, you know, zig and zag, because we are learning as we go, you can build a very successful company there. But so just need to be flexible and listen to advice.
Agility is absolutely the right approach to go in this kind of environment. And Andrea?
I'm going to say something very pragmatic in a sense that I would say what the COVID environment has really enlightened for me and many of my peers in the Valley is there is no shame in just picking up the phone and calling those around you that you need to ask for help or ask a question, or you're just looking to catch up. I am much less shameless. I'm very shameless is what I really should say around just picking up the phone and calling those that I otherwise would be meeting with in an ad hoc fashion. And everyone should be willing to do that. I think everyone today is looking for human connection. They're looking for support, and everyone, I would say, especially this amazing community that is built here in this forum, we're all here to help. So use the opportunity to just pick up the phone and call those around you. And I would say you'll probably be pleasantly surprised by how willing everyone is willing to help. So I hope that helps everyone across the board.
I think that is such an important point as well, because coming from an investor standpoint, investors have seen so many different companies and startups, and a lot of them have a lot of experience navigating different business cycles. So don't be afraid to reach out and say, hey, you might be navigating some difficulties right now. Is this an area that you can help? Or is this an area that you can introduce me to another investor and try to kind of navigate that? I think that ability to really be upfront about the difficulties and challenges that you are facing, it's so critical. And I think going back to Chenyang or Carman's point, it's about agility. that the flexibility to adapt to the changing environment is also absolutely critical to navigate all these challenges right now. So I know that everyone has been trying to introduce themselves through the chat box, which I think is absolutely amazing, because usually when we're in person, we try to exchange business cards or exchange WeChat, but people has been trying to introduce themselves through the chat. Although I was trying hard to find a question, but I think this is kind of an amazing way of doing it virtually. So I wanted to thank everyone of the panelists. I want to thank Andrea and Carman and Chenyang. Thank you for your time and your insights. I think this is an incredible panel, and I hope that the audience also found it very insightful as well. So with that, thank you, and good day and good evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Wendy and Gary.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.